Oh, hello, class. Now we're going to continue with chapter 3, the investigation of health, which in a way we discussed two methods used, that are mainly used. You have the quantitative health research and the qualitative health research. One is quantitative is purely based on facts obtained using survey instruments or observation of an experiment, or you have the randomized study that is being tracked. Now we are going further to see some of the value of the quantitative health research, or some of its strength. Say the quantitative approaches have provided large data sets with document changing health trends across United Kingdom. We can say as well across America, because there's a lot of quantitative research that is being used. In terms of comparing the two, quantitative research is used in most cases than qualitative. And further field demonstrating which areas should be a priority for practitioners. I say because part of the whole thing about research is also see what is the issue. Find out what is the issue that is causing the health-related concern, and see how best you can prioritize your resources to be able to address that issue. So an example here, for example, the health survey for England 2008 shows changing United Kingdom trends such as increasing rate of obesity rates and rate of death from alcohol-associated diseases. So the survey shows that there is an increasing rate of obesity and rate of death from alcohol-associated diseases. I think we can almost say about the same here in terms of obesity, because again, obesity most of the time could be the primary cause. Obesity giving rise to heart-related issues, giving rise to diabetes, and in some cases, even cancer. So obesity everywhere, regardless of either England or the state, is a root cause of some of the health-related issues. Even right now, with the the number of people dying from COVID-19, most of the time, obesity is associated as one of the risk factors, or some of the comorbid factors that contribute to the death of some people, especially when it comes to minorities and some other populations. Alcohol use is also a risk factor that leads to either accidents, diseases such as diseases of the liver, and in some cases also cancer. So again, quantitative health research, when used properly, can be able to provide the data that support some of these things. Now, when you talk of qualitative, most of the time is people are interviewed. You interview certain people about either their lifestyles or their opinion or their experiences. And what you can always find out that whenever you go through the interviewing process, you can see, even though people experience the same issue, people most of the time, their responses are based on their feeling, their experiences about the situation, or their own biases at times. So most of the time, it's good. But you, the person who is really conducting the research, has to really be very, very good to flush out certain biases or certain things to make the interview data very good. See, here you really need to really be good at focusing at what information are you really looking for. And you have to know how to do it. It's not everybody that can do an effective qualitative research. You have to be skilled in doing it, or else your data will not be as useful. Then you have focus groups. Say, okay, you want to interview sophomore students at Virginia State University with regards to their opinion about guns, gun laws, who should have gun and who should not. You see, it's tailored, a focus group, tailored group. And you get their opinion, you get the feedback from them, and later on collectively different groups of the same, then later on, eventually you can streamline their responses. See how many people really said one thing. And from there, you take that one thing that is said by, say, you collapse the data and see what is the response of the group, or the common response, the most popular response. That you can make the assumption that that is the opinion of that group or the concern of that group. Then at times you do the observations. You observe people for quite some time, see what are their behavior, see what are their behaviors towards certain issues, see how they react to certain situations. So you observe, you have to be able to observe, and from your observation, you do this, you come up, and make up certain conclusions. Now, the qualitative sampling, how is it being done? Qualitative samples are mostly made up of people, characteristics, experiences, documents, images, and settings. Made up of people. Or they're looking for certain characteristics, certain group of people and for them to explain their, find out about their experiences. And also you look at documents using secondary data, analyze those documents and see what comes out, what stands out as the issue. Then you deal with images and settings. See, unlike quantitative research, there is no set rule for having a specific sample size. You see, with quantitative research, at least you need at least 10% of the populations that you are investigating. Most of the time, that gives you a better 10% of response. But unlike the qualitative, there is no specific sample size within qualitative research. So again, it's very difficult to generalize when using qualitative research, because first of all, maybe the sample size is just not representative of the population, and therefore you cannot readily generalize. The nature of the research questions, the scope of the study, and the length of time available will influence the size of any qualitative sample. So the nature of the study and the time it takes, because it's very much consuming. Interviewing people, because that's oral, most of the time is oral. You know, people tell you, you go there with a mic or at a tape recorder, they tell you their opinion and this, and later on you have to make sure that for each of your subjects, you analyze their responses, then see what are some of the common things. And it takes some time. Qualitative samples do not aim to be representative. See, this was what I said, because most of the time, again, depending on the size, and some of it is purely individual's opinion about issues, and it can be subjective. So, and there are certain times wherein also qualitative samples can be convenient samples. See, convenient samples are, you get a certain group, you go to a church and try to ask them about issues relating to either sex or other. Most of the time, you are much more likely to get a negative reaction to some of these social issues. But if you randomize the scope, you go to a church, you go to a gym, you go to other places, you go to a school, most of the time you kind of get a snapshot of the entire community, even though the number might be relatively small compared to the larger community, but the sample is much more representative. When the sample is representative, then you can generalize. But if it's not representative, then you cannot. Your study is only relevant for that group of people that you studied. Now, qualitative sample can be convenient samples, quota samples, purposive samples, snowball network samples. So again, qualitative analysis, how do you analyze once you get the data? How do you go about analyzing your data? As a result of the data being in the form of words, qualitative research do not have a specific set of formulae to analyze the data. See, unlike quantitative, the responses are in the form of either numbers or data. And to calculate those, you need some specific scientific formula to do that, which is not used in the qualitative analysis process. Here, you just have to deal with the words and see which of the words or which ideas are being promoted the most by your target population, the people you studied or you conducted your investigation with. Now, qualitative analysis can involve thematic analysis, which starts with data being coded. You do some coding, you look for words, and based on those words that are used by people, you do the coding or phraseology. Miles and Hoberman's framework for qualitative analysis is that data is reduced, then displayed, and finally the researchers draw and verifies conclusions. As with any, you look for some keywords, common keywords that are used, common key expressions. Once you get those, you display those, and from there you can draw your conclusion. Or you look for common experiences. Or common concerns, what people say about certain things. And from there, you look the entire data, and based on that, you can draw some conclusion. The value of qualitative health research. Health-related qualitative research has provided a wealth of data about people's experiences. So when you're dealing with people's experiences, then the qualitative data is very, very important. Especially when you're dealing with, say, people's experiences dealing with discrimination, dealing with racism, or dealing with issues pertaining inequalities. And first of all, you have to define what does it mean when you're talking about racism. You let them understand what you're looking for. Have they been harassed? Have they been treated poorly because of their race? Have they been called names? Have they been demoralized? And in some cases, have they been brutally treated or physically malhandled? See, those, let people tell you their experiences. And based on the common responses, certain words that you'll be looking for in their response, that will help you to really come up with a possible conclusion. But what as in any research, quantitative, qualitative, you always want to define what you are looking for. When you say racism, what does it mean to you? When you say inequality, what does it mean? So that the subjects know what they are responding to. Because that can be a guide as to how they can respond to the questions. You have to be very thorough so that they know whenever they hear the word racism, they know how you defined it. Because most of the time, certain studies have produced data, but at the end of the day, it's not relevant to the research question. Because the way the research was framed did not provide the subject enough information as to how to go about to respond to the questions. So again, regardless of quantitative, qualitative, you have to be very thorough. When you say this, what does it mean? Define your words. Explain to the people the question, what you are talking about, so that they know when they respond, they know what they are responding to. You reduce this idea of them coming up with their own opinion and this, at least you try to help them with what you really want to know about. And at times, yeah, you can allow them to also say what they want to say. Because certain times we might be limiting them to be able to express what they want to. But it's better if they know what you want, what you're looking for, and respond to those. Quantitative approaches have enabled the voice of social actors to be heard so that they can articulate their own stories and narratives in relation to their health. Say most of the time when you think of social activists, you think of racism, you think of Black Lives Matter. Those are social actors, people who started some of those things. And they articulated some of the things that made them feel that way. Or some of those experiences that made them want to let the public know that Black lives matter. Just like any other life from any other group. If white lives matter, then Black lives should also matter. And they tell stories about their own personal experiences, give narratives in relation to their health, their safety. Because when you talk of health, also you talk of safety. When you are not safe, most of the time you're not healthy. So research has provided insight into interactions between healthcare professionals and patients. So demonstrating the process and the power within them. You see, most of the time there is the professional health providers have power, but at the same time also patients have power. They have their own rights. And patients should also have the power to express their feeling as to how well have they been treated or how poorly have they been treated. And it might be a personal experience, but at the same time, there is the notion that if one thing has been done to one person, the probability that it has been done to more people, if more people are asked or have the opportunity to explain their experience. Yes, and some of those assumptions have been proven right when the net is widened or the investigation net is widened. Ask more people of similar characteristics. Now, similar characteristics can be race, can be socioeconomic status, poverty, homeless, women, of gender, of race. So most of the time, when you expand the scope of the study, you tend to get valuable information that started with only one patient. And when you expand the pool, you find out that, yeah, it happened to one person, but it has happened to many more others upon the investigation. Now, the qualitative approaches have also been used to empower participants. For example, getting patients to think positively about cancer while allowing researchers to explore patient talk. They say most of the time there's always the idea of, yeah, cancer, everything being normal is a disease that is still one of the leading causes of death, premature death. But all the same, when people that have been diagnosed of the disease, if they only think about the negative impact, that can bring them to their demise much faster. So most of the time is you look about some of the positive things that have been done, some of the research that has been done, the medications that have been available, and treat every day as just one day. Thank God you have the day and move on, rather than saying, oh, my world is done. Let me just close shop and be ready to die. You see. Here is the differences between the qualitative the quantitative and qualitative research. Now, this is a very important table that you have to make sure that you take time to just see, especially if some of you down the road are interested in furthering your studies and research. The relationship between researchers and subject. So most of the time, with the quantitative research, you don't even need to meet with your subject. You only have to define your subject, people you're looking for. Those people can live in different states. As long as they use the questionnaire and respond to the questionnaire as best as possible, you'll get the data you want from your study, for your study. Unlike the qualitative, you have to be close. You have to interview the person. And you have to make sure that you get from the person what you're expecting. Now, the researcher stands is as an outsider, the qualitative as an insider, how theory and concept are used. Most of the time with quantitative, you try to confirm your theory, your hypothesis. Now, with the qualitative, is emergent. Theories emerge from the data once the research has been carried out. With quantitative, you start with your theory, you make based on your literature review or your assumptions, you develop a theory and use that theory to confirm or dismiss your theory. With qualitative, is you collect the data and based on your findings, then you develop your theory. The scope of the finding, how far can you generalize your study? See, with quantitative, you can generalize your study. The quantitative, the survey method, you can generalize, especially if you're using a random sample. You sample your subject. That can be generalized. With qualitative, you cannot. Your findings are just as effective for the group that you study. You cannot generalize it to other groups. Image of social reality, the social world. Have static and external to actors. The real world it's external. It's not. It's not one of those wherein you, as the investigator, can persuade. The qualitative is processual and socially constructed by the actor. Nature of data for quantitative is hard data and reliable. Now, for qualitative, it is short data, it's soft, rich, and deep. It's soft, It's rich because this is people saying, using people's word, and it's deep. It goes into people's emotions, their feelings. The research tools that are used, you have the experiment, you have the randomized control trials, the RCTS, these are randomized control trials. Then you have surveys. For the qualitative, you have interviews, focus groups, and observations. Now, when you combine both, combining the qualitative and quantitative approach, despite the differences between these approaches, there are also some similarities. First of all, whenever you say the word research, regardless of whatever, the intent of research is to gather data, gather information. Most of the time is the process and how the data is used that can give some variation. But new data is generated with any research. It is possible to combine these different forms of research within a single study in a mixed method approach, assessing multiple sources of information using a range of different tools is likely to provide researchers with a much more comprehensive picture of the area that they are investigating. When you use different approaches, you do the survey or use an experimental approach, and you also ask people's opinion, people's experiences. It's most of the time it's easy for you to see the commonalities based on the responses. Mixed methods are generally used to compare different findings, to investigate different perspectives on issues, and to generate different types of data from both methodological traditions and quantitative and qualitative. Combining research techniques in this way is commonly called methodological triangulations. Triangulations. It's again, it's done, but in most cases, people either go with the qualitative approach or the quantitative approach because it's much more involved when both methods are combined. How to analyze the data. But once that is done, it's much stronger. You have the research ethics. As with anything, we as human beings, or researchers, teachers, doctors, religious leaders, pastors, politicians, there are guiding laws, there are guiding principles that you have to adhere to as a professional. For any professional entity, you have code of ethics. And that code of ethics should make sure that you adhere to those conditions. As a teacher, there are certain things you are allowed to do with students and certain things that you are not allowed to do with students. Same with the police. Same with politicians. And as a researcher, there are certain guidelines. You don't cook your data because you want it to give you what you are looking for. You base your reporting based on your data, not your bias. Okay, there are key principles relating to ethics that should underpin all research projects. Research projects often require ethical approval and are expected to adhere to specific code of ethics. So in most cases, you have the subject and it has to be approved by by a group that undersees the study or the either the institution that you represent, the scientific review team. They're making sure that, okay, your questions are properly and you are clearly, you've defined your target. You have a board that will review your method. Is your method going to harm the subject? If it's going to harm the subject, they will not approve your study. Especially when you're dealing with minors and people who are incarcerated. People are very, very, very sensitive, you know. The review boards are usually very, very sensitive in making sure that you say what you're going to do. And they understand that the research project often require ethical approval and are expected to adhere. Once it has been approved, you are expected to adhere to the code of ethics, the rules that governs your research process. Principles of research ethics include protection from harm. Your research should not harm anybody, should not coerce anybody, force somebody to do it. People can stop. Say, for instance, you are in the process of interviewing somebody and you start experiencing, and the subject feels uncomfortable with your questioning. They can say enough of it, and you have to allow them to stop. You have to stop the process. Or some people, even as they continue to work on the survey or these days, if they get to the point wherein they are not, they don't feel comfortable proceeding with it, they can be stopped. People should freely engage in the research process, not be coerced, not be forced. And they have to give you an informed consent that, yes, I'm willing to participate in this study. In some cases, people have to write or sign that they want to participate in this study. If they say no, don't force them. And some people can say yes. And as they continue along the process and they get to a point where then they don't want to, they have the right to stop. So informed consent participants should be fully aware of the research process and be able to consent freely. This is achieved by the use of information sets and consent forms. Anonymity, people should not, they want to be anonymous. They don't want to say, oh, well, if I take part in this study, somebody should be able, when they look at it and say, oh, this came from Andrew. No, people should not be able to direct this. They might find my response is to me. I should be anonymous. That's very, very important. The privacy part has to be anonymous. Participants should not be able to be identified. Then you talk of confidentiality. Participants should be aware what happens to the data they provide and how will and who will see it. Those people using those questionnaires should have a way wherein they do some coding with the questionnaire, and that information only rests in the hands of the researcher. Somebody else should not be able to say, oh, this came from Andrew, or this came from Joe, or there it should be anonymous. And once the data is produced, the outcome should be shared to those people who participated in the study. And as I said, also rights to withdraw from the research process up to a clearly identified point if they choose to. As I said, they might have signed their consent form or really participating in the research process, but if they get to a point wherein they don't want to continue, they have the rights to withdraw from the study. Then you have the evidence-based practice. Research is essential within the field of health for practitioners to acquire an evidence base. Evidence-based practice is simply the application of research findings to practice situations. Research has helped develop and improve practice in a number of ways. By evaluating services and their effectiveness, because we can only know something works when it's been assessed, when it's been evaluated. Because people can be spending so much money on things that do not work because it has not been assessed. So research can help to show, yeah, this works because these are the outcomes that whatever you are implementing is leading to. Or whatever service you're providing is not really giving you your expected outcomes. So maybe either retweak your service and also try, because one of the things that, especially with this the evaluation service, it's not that, okay, certain services are not provided to minority groups, but most of the time it's either too late, not enough, and poorly delivered. The messaging is poorly delivered. So the effectiveness is not there. So that's why, as we are really dealing with trying to address inequality or um, um, disparities, we have to make sure that the services that are provided to meet the needs of minority populations. And the way that service is implemented should be done by people who are culturally sensitive to the needs of minorities. And also, the service should be appropriate. You see, other than that, it's not going to work. And I hope there's enough research to show that a good amount of money or resources have been wasted because of poorly identifying the needs, inadequate resources, poor communication, poor engagement, and poor outcomes. So, if our goal is to address disparities and inequalities in health outcomes, I think we have to make sure that we really do an effective evaluation. We really do an effective evaluation of what are the issues based on the subject that we want to really address. How can we address this? Who are the people that can address it appropriately? Yes, there's the feeling that, okay, every professional is just equally good to address certain populations. But most of the time, there are certain nuance in cultural situations that people from a particular culture have a much, much higher success in engaging people within those cultures. That's why we are working as hard as possible to increase the number of minority professionals that can go into the health field to help provide the adequate needs for the minority population and also others. By evaluating the clinical effectiveness of intervention and treatment. Again, when it comes to some of this clinical effectiveness of intervention and treatment, most of the time, especially when it comes to drugs, see how many minorities are really involved when these drugs or treatment interventions are being developed. Because we have to increase the number of minorities in some of those clinical activities. We have to increase more women, minority women, because the medicines are already there. But most of the time, because of the slight nuance based on certain situations, some of those medicines are much more effective with whites than with minorities. And some of those things have to be addressed. Not just say, oh, well, the minorities are blah, 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 and let's move on. Because if you move on, and hoping to get a better outcome, you will be disappointed. The outcome will always be negative. So we have to involve enough minorities whenever these interventions are being put into play, when they are working on some of these clinical trials, so that some of the variations that could be assessed between different groups could be addressed. By examining improvements of patients undergoing treatment using quality of life measures. Again, that was the same. So you have to understand how effective, because there are a lot of treatments through the years as research has really improved. There are a lot of treatments that are now very effective for whites, the white male. But not as effective as white women. Then not as effective for black men, and not as effective for black women. And some of these things, if people are much more, you involve minority groups in the clinical when these things are being put together, trying to come up with interventions or with the drugs, I think the outcome will be better for all. Ray suggests 3 stages that practitioners and students will need to go through in order to draw on evidence to inform their patient. 1, finding evidence. 2, appraising evidence. 3, applying the evidence to practice. Find the outcomes. Try to understand the outcomes. Appraise it. Which one is more effective? Like rank it. Then apply that evidence into your practice. Then you have the summary. Again, as I said at the start of the class, research is very, very important, especially from this point moving forward. The more you engage in the research process, the better it is for you as a professional, and also the better it is for you in providing relevant information for your community that can be used to improve their quality of health. So don't be afraid of it. Take advantage of it. Yeah, when you start, it might be difficult or appear to be difficult, especially when you see some mathematics and all the, oh, this is too much, or statistics, oh, I can't do this. You can, there you go, you can go with the summative and the qualitative method. Study, know how to ask questions, know how to set your questions, know how to the interview process. That is one way. If you are strong in mathematics and you can handle those statistics, use the quantitative method. Because again, a lot of people have studied minorities, but that has really not improved the overall health of minorities. It is about time for minority professionals to really spend time studying minorities. Come up with data that is relevant to that group. Because as a minority researcher, you have an added advantage. You know some of the cultural nuance. You know the language. People might say one thing, but in reality, they mean something. Or when they say this, it's something other. So you coming from that culture, you can really flush out the information that you really need to get from them. So as young students, please don't be afraid of being engaged in the research process because your services are much needed. In order to provide a rich understanding of health-related issues, both quantitative and qualitative research methodologies need to be utilized. Different research questions can be addressed by differing research designs and methods. Again, thank you so much. And we end the lecture here today. And you have a nice day. Be safe and take care.